generative AI and its future and its impact on business. My name is Michael Rovatsos. I'm a professor of AI at the School of Informatics of the University of Edinburgh, and I've been in AI for over 25 years, and probably there has never been a more exciting time for the field of artificial intelligence. And for those of you who don't know the Base Center is the University of Edinburgh's innovation hub for data science and AI, and it's a community of academics, industry experts, entrepreneurs, and students who all are trying to exploit new technologies emerging in the digital space from techniques like data science and AI to create value for society and the economy. So in today's event, we want to explore whether generative AI has reached the peak of its hype cycle. We've all been hearing a lot about generative AI, and many people are asking themselves what it means for them in their jobs, in their business context, in their roles in the organizations they're working with. And I'm really delighted that we have a great set of speakers today for our forum who will give us different perspectives on this. So we have experts from academia and industry and who have all deep experience of working with Gen AI, and I'm sure they will share valuable insights with this audience. And it's great to see that so many of you have joined today to attend this forum. So before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that the event is recorded. So if you don't want your image or audio to be shown, please, you can send your questions through the chat and we'll pick these up at the end. And I hope we will have some time to discuss these issues with the audience after our three speakers have given their presentations. So to kick us off, I'll invite my colleague, Edoardo Ponti, who is a lecturer in natural language processing at the School of Informatics at our university. And for those of you who aren't familiar with our natural language processing group, it's one of the strongest research teams in natural language processing in the world. Looks back on a very long and glorious history. And Edoardo's work focuses particularly on generative AI. And Edoardo, if I can now ask you to turn your camera on and share your thoughts with us.
Well, thanks so much for the introduction, Michael, and thanks for the invite to this panel. I don't think I can answer this question in 5 minutes, so if Gen AI is a bubble or we can expect more disruption from it, but what I think I can do is give some insights on recent developments in Gen AI and how I think they might impact industry. So the first one I'd like to mention is a recent rise in open source foundation models. And this includes, for instance, Command from Cohere, Mistral, Llama 3 from Meta, and many others. And when OpenAI's GPT-4 was released, I think no one thought it would be possible to bridge the gap with its performance so quickly. But nowadays we have models that are open source, so their parameters are fully accessible, that reach a similar performance. This means that for companies there is an increased opportunity for customization of these models by intervening directly on their parameters, possibly even with efficient techniques for fine-tuning, such as parameter efficient fine-tuning, quantization, and so on. So this is, I think, going to lead to a trend where companies will be able to customize LLMs and foundation models more broadly to a larger extent. The second trend I'd like to mention is the fact that many more modalities have been integrated into API LLMs. And for instance, Sora came out recently that basically enables people to generate videos with a very high quality. So this means that now videos have become a new domain for generative AI. And more broadly, cross-modal interactions are now possible. So for instance, GPT-4 Turbo now has vision capabilities. So for instance, it's now capable not just of generating text, but also images. And this means that there is a larger scope of applications, even with API LLMs, which are black box models. third trend I'd like to mention is that now these models have much longer contexts, which means that they can take into account larger amounts of data and longer sequences, which means that we move from a setup where the kind of information a model could base its decision on was limited to maybe like in the order of 10,000 tokens. And nowadays with, for instance, Gemini, we can reach 1 million tokens. And this, again, is, I think, a great opportunity whenever we want to integrate data, and especially sequences that are particularly long, which means, again, extending to new domains. Just to give an example, biomedical. Another important aspect of recent LLM development is that there is now a tendency to think of LLMs as a sort of router. So not just using LLMs per se, but also integrating them into a larger ecosystem. So this has been labeled LLM agents. And in practice, this means that LLMs can now interact with tools, such as calculators, maps, calendars, translators. It can interact with browsers. They can interact with programs, so generating and evaluating code from Python or SQL. And so this means that the integration of these models into companies' workflows is becoming easier. And so this is, I think, also a very encouraging trend. Finally, an opportunity for companies nowadays is if you don't want to customize LLMs, there are techniques such as retrieval augmented generation, or RAG for short, where you can condition the model generation on data that have been retrieved, but without modifying the model parameters. This means that some companies can even just monetize their data more easily if they operate in a certain specific sector, I don't know, aviation or I don't know, delivery, and share that data with other parties without worrying about, concerns of privacy or even sharing sensitive information. So this means that there are new opportunities for monetization of data through RAG systems. Having said that, there are also many possible failure modes I see in using generative AI and integrating them into companies more broadly. Sometimes using old-fashioned ML systems is the right solution. So I think a failure mode that is very common is just to, overkilling it and using Gen AI when existing systems are perfectly fine and maybe even offer some advantages. LLMs are usually a bit of a black box, so they don't offer the same interpretability and generalization bounds, guarantees that traditional ML systems instead offer. I've seen attempts to aim for full automation, removing humans from the loop, which is, I think, very dangerous. And I think instead of this second failure mode, I would argue that the right way to go about it is to think of generative AI as a way to augment and enhance or assist human capabilities. So this is why I think in general, Gen AI is not a bubble, but we have to be careful in how we integrate it and use it, again, for the benefit of society and business. So
Thank you.
this is the end of my
Thank you.
talk.
That's a great overview, and I think it sort of sets the scene because you've mentioned lots of things that are happening at the moment and also risks. If I can just follow up with like just one question, which is possibly difficult. What would you advise somebody working in industry or the public sector, how they should go about deciding whether Gen AI is right for them?
Well, I think like there are many factors at play here. So again, even choosing between using open source LLMs or API LLMs have different pros and cons. One is more customizable again. So if you need to really fine tune your model towards a specific application that your company particularly cares about, then I would go that direction. If you just need general conversation capabilities or generation capabilities of different modalities, I would go with API LLMs. And then obviously there are also sort of cost opportunities, sort of considerations to be made here with respect to the two options. I would say that, again, nowadays there are already many existing specialized LLMs available from hubs online, such as Hugging Face is obviously first that comes to mind. So the first thing I would do for a company is just check if someone already did that homework, and maybe the model you need is already available and free and accessible, and you just have to sort of look for it in this existing ecosystem of asynchronously and independently developed systems that people contribute to these online hubs.
Great, thank you. I'm sure we'll have opportunity to discuss this also with the other speakers at the end. But thank you very much for now. So next I would like to introduce Charis Sfyrakis, who is CEO of Algomo. He is, I am very happy to say, an alumnus of Edinburgh University. He did his master's here about 15 years ago, and then went on to have a career in financial services and in various data science and AI positions in other companies, and is now running his own company that is doing cutting-edge AI for business clients and partner organizations. So I'm sure he will have very interesting things to share with us. So over to you, Charis.
So yeah, thanks for that, Michael. So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Charis. So today I'll speak up it was very interesting to hear Edoardo's presentation before, because many things he touched upon, I will walk him through a presentation that I prepared without us having a line of that. So that's pretty interesting to see many of his points being reiterated here. Let me share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Yeah. So as a company, what we're working on is customer service, and we're extensively using LLMs since actually February 2023. We have been experimenting with generative AI a bit before, but there was no reliable model before that. So, with the advent of ChatGPT, we decided that this is the way to go. And over the course of the past year and a half, we realized that there is a trend around AI agents that, besides going through a simple chatbot that can answer questions, you can actually orchestrate different workflows, and you can call different tools, and you can do more complex things rather than just answering questions. So that's what I'll be talking a bit about today, challenges we have faced, and also for trying to overcome them. So let's start with what are AI agents. Edoardo talked a bit about that. So you can think about them as programs that they can make choices, perform tasks, and they are generally following some instructions and a goal set by a user. So for us, for example, some customers, we're doing customer service, but the financial provider, it's purely about customer service. Some e-commerce clients of ours also think about sales. So, the persona and the actions and the tools that these agents can take differ for our customers. And what makes LLMs, generative AI, pretty interesting is because you can think of them as general reasoners. I'm saying it's a very biased word here and a very strong word, but generally they have general capabilities. So they can reason, plan, and execute. Even the same LLM, without fine-tuning it, can perform these actions. And this provides a lot of possibilities because you can orchestrate workflows that were not possible before. You have to create separate agents for each one of them. So let's think about what an agent can do. So first of all, an agent can plan, and planning means that they can reflect, so they can look up upon their actions. They can orchestrate. They can say, look, I will go through a specific plan, and I will make these bullet points, and I will act accordingly. And they can actually go through their actions and see, did I perform as I wanted, and can iterate over that. So you can have reflection, self-critique, chain of thoughts, and so forth. They can also have memory, so they can go over the past interactions they had with the customer and the tools they called, and they store them, and they can recall, for example, names. They can recall actions that have happened in the past, and so forth. Something very, very important is that they can access the environment through tools. So as Edoardo said, you can check up the calendar, they can actually search, this is very important for us, and they can call other APIs. So for example, we're doing a lot of work with e-commerce, and maybe you can go through an order status API. You can see if your order has been delivered, or you can cancel an order, and so forth. And obviously, you can also do actions. So can say, which is about canceling the order, for example, or I maybe not understanding what the customer says, maybe I want to reiterate, and so forth. So this is very complex, obviously. What we have found is that the agents, they can surprise us they have surprised us with how advanced they can go, but on the other hand, they can go completely off, and we need some guardrails in order to tame them. And that's why I will go through the next slide, which talks about the two modes we're thinking about customer service and how we're actually trying to think about this problem. So traditional chatbots is autopilot. You talk to an AI, you can call some tools, it can respond to you. It is self-serve, but it's risky. And why is it risky? Because it might, well, the most benign thing is not do exactly what you told it, or can be a bit off. But the most dangerous thing the AI can do is to actually give you false information. And in some business critical operations, like in the bank, you cannot tell in a bank that my interest rate for charging is 0. There's a lot of reputational risks and also operational risks in that. So that's why we're also building a copilot mode, which means that instead of the AI providing the responses straight away to the visitor, they're providing these responses as assistance to customer service agents. What happens here is that the agents can interact, they can actually see, they can correct the responses from the AI. And this feedback loop about, that is comparing the difference between what the AI suggested and what the agent, the human agent actually did, is providing very useful training data, which can be used, and we'll show you a bit later on building more bespoke and fine-tuned models. And the other important thing here is building trust. And that happens in 2 ways. First of all, you can see, we have seen multiple times that big clients, they take quite some time to deploy and leverage AI in general. The reason is because they want to test it extensively, whereby if you go with a copilot mode, actually you can have the customer service agents, the people that are getting the most of the business value, continuously validate, understand the model. We're not talking about full transparency, but there is some trustworthiness in how the model performs, because they can see how the AI performs, and they can gradually improve the interactions. And this actually is a way that we're all linked together here. So Natwest, Algomo, and the University of Edinburgh, along to other partners, we're working with the UK government-funded project about how can reduce hallucinations in customer service operations. So hallucinations are non-factual / misleading responses that the AI can give. And actually, they have been proved to be the biggest obstacle in actually using and adopting generative AI in large organizations. So it's much more difficult for a big bank to put in front of the customers compared to traditional scripted chatbots. Previous scripted chatbots might not get it always correct, but the response they were giving were true. Whereby here, the AI can get correct, but can give you misleading information. And then I will show you how Copilot links with Autopilot. So I think there is an animation here. So imagine that this is the first question that comes from a visitor, and then you have one LLM. The LLM will provide an answer. So questions like, what is the maximum loan to value that someone can borrow? And then the AI responds with this response. And then what happens is the customer service agent can provide an alternative response. So this might be a different content or even a different style. So here it's more about style. Like we're trying to capture how, for example, here a specific bank could copyright the responses. And what happens, you can compare these 2 responses. You can find the difference between these 2 responses. And then this difference is a loss that can be used to train the original model. You have the version 2 here. So with this approach, firstly, you have the agent that actually can correct the responses from the AI while providing value. But through this continuous loop, you can gradually get to the point that the business can have trust to feel empowered enough and confident enough that they can release this version 2 or this next version models into the public. Yeah, I think that's very quickly what I had to say. Some other things maybe I want to iterate over is that I said in the beginning that LLMs are general purpose models. We feel that it's much better to use bespoke, smaller models for specific tasks rather than using an all-encompassing MIG model. This has helped us a lot. Also with agent and workflows. For example, in some of the agents, we have the planner. So the planner has to be a very strong model. It's okay if it's a bit slow, but we need the plan and the architecture of the response to be correct. And then have the copywriter. So the copywriter could be a very cheap, a very dumb, let's say, model within quotation marks, but we don't care. You know, this model just follows instructions of the planner and just provides the responses that it needs. So we kind of see this specialization. We see this emergent need to have specialized agents for each different tasks. And then, of course, the big question mark is how to orchestrate everything, how to make sure that the overall plan will follow. And to be honest, even us humans are not very good at doing that. Hopefully, with generative AI, with this all the self-critic and making sure that we can follow the plan, we can improve the overall performance. Yeah, that's very quickly what I had to say. I don't know if Michael, you have any questions?
Thank you. Thank you. No, I think that was very interesting, and I think you have highlighted this issue of trust and of reliability, which many people worry about, and I'm sure we will come back to that later, and because it is an important thing, how also business customers, but also end users can actually be sure that the quality of responses they're given and solutions they're given is high enough to trust these sorts of systems. Thank you, Charis. Very interesting presentation. So now I'm going to move on to Euan. Euan Wielewski is machine learning lead at the Natwest group, and he also looks back on a long career of having kind of being an AI and machine learning lead in various organizations. And I think he can also give us a perspective from kind of, the big corporate environment where there is a history of using different technologies and innovation and also aligning business activity with new things that come out of research and development, such as Gen AI. So without further ado, over to Euan.
Thank you very much, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the invite along to this event. To give you a little bit of a background on myself, so God, it must be about nearly 20 years ago now. I guess I did my PhD at the University of Oxford. I then spent some time as an academic at the University of Glasgow. I had a AI startup before joining Natwest Group, and I now lead the applied AI team at Natwest. So Natwest, in case some of you aren't aware, is one of the UK's largest banks. We cover everything from retail banking, where we provide sort of current accounts, through to mortgages for our customers, all the way through to things like private banking for wealthy individuals like Coutts Bank, and also kind of market functions where we've got Natwest Markets, which is our kind of where we do our stocks and stock trading activities. So we're a large financial services group that covers a wide variety of different sort of financial services functions across the kind of spectrum, really. So my team lives within data science and innovation. So the applied AI team acts as a central hub for a kind of central hub of excellence across the Natwest group, where we working with what we call our spoke teams in the various different franchises and functions that make up the group to understand new AI use cases and capabilities, and then deploy them into production with those spoke partners within the organization. We also work to stand up capabilities in those spoke teams and make sure that there's a sustainable kind of critical mass of kind of machine learning engineering and machine learning research capabilities within the bank to sustain those use cases going forward. So in terms of AI and machine learning within Natwest, I think it's worth saying that these are not new concepts in Natwest. We're obviously we've utilized these technologies for over a decade now. Obviously there's kind of some of the kind of quintessential machine learning use cases that come up, which is the most obvious one would be fraud detection, where we extensively use machine learning to feed into our various different protection mechanisms for our customers. Through to things that are maybe a little less obvious, but things like understanding our customers better through using machine learning to first of all translate, to transcribe and then understand conversations we have with our customers through our telephony channels, and messaging channels as well. So there's a wide variety of different use cases that we have for AI and machine learning. And again, it's nothing new to us. And that's all kind of been built on a decade's worth of investment in our data infrastructure. We've spent a huge amount of time and effort moving from traditional on-prem deployments through to cloud, our kind of current sort of state-of-the-art cloud infrastructure. And that's been a huge accelerator for us. Last week, actually, Andrew Jassy, who's the CEO of Amazon, mentioned Natwest in his shareholder letter as a kind of a shining sort of beacon of success for AWS in terms of how you go about setting up a new machine learning platform and then drive value from it. And so I think that really kind of goes to show how seriously we take it and how big the impact has been for us in terms of making that shift and making that investment early in our data infrastructure. The recent sort of hype of generative AI is really just accelerated that journey for us. I often say that we're riding the generative AI wave, but we're on a data and machine learning surfboard, right? We know the wave will eventually subside, but we're riding it for as long as we possibly can, making sure that we make the investments to have a sustainable capability going forward, and not just be solely focused on generative AI use cases right now as well, which I think is something that some enterprises are struggling with. Is like the wave of generative AI has really forced many companies to rapidly adopt AI capabilities, but they've maybe not done that in the most sustainable way because they've not put in the investment in early into their underpinning infrastructure. We've been saying that we've been a very early adopter of generative AI. So our chief data officer actually got a sneak preview of ChatGPT before it went live when he went over to visit OpenAI in San Francisco back in, I guess it would be like summer 2022. And that kind of really started us on our journey. And so we were well prepped to kind of get started on the generative AI journey. And early in 2023, we kicked off some generative AI pilots. We started building out all the infrastructure and access to the various different tooling that we needed. And then we went out to the business to secure, understand potential use cases, and then secure funding to allow us to move forward at pace in 2024, which we are now doing. So that kind of exercise where we went out to the business and looked to source use cases for generative AI and AI more broadly, we came back with over 500 use cases from across the bank. So there's huge opportunities, and that kind of adds up to hundreds of millions worth of value that can be created through AI within our organization. And so it's a really huge opportunity for us. So to enable that, we stood up a generative AI program, and that has been funded centrally by our executive committee, and we're now moving forward at pace and mobilizing and productionizing the highest value use cases that were identified during that process. And my team is like effectively spearheading that sort of drive to productionize a lot of these generative AI use cases. Now, obviously, given that we're a heavily regulated financial services company, risk is a major consideration for us. We've spoke about it a lot already today. Key things for us are like, how do we ensure that any outputs from large language models are unbiased and fair? How do we predict against new threats like prompt injection? These are like challenges that we're facing on a day-to-day basis and building out solutions for right now. So as part of the program that we've stood up, we've also stood up an AI risk working group, which feeds into our already existing model risk processes. So, again, given that we're a heavily regulated organization, you'd find you shouldn't be surprised that we've got some very strict model risk processes in place. So if we want to deploy a machine learning model, it's not simply a kind of situation where we can kind of press deploy to prod. We have to go through all the required governance, and that allows us to safely, securely deploy those models. And that's kind of been, I think, as important as the infrastructure, standing up the governance that surrounds the deployment of models, because that allows you to move forward with the kind of security that that you're deploying models in a safe and reliable way. I think one of the key themes that's came out over the last 6 months for us is how difficult it is to evaluate these models. These models are not simple binary classifiers. They, obviously they're incredibly rich outputs that come from these models, and you really need to invest time and resources into evaluating the outputs. And typically that's with subject matter experts for every new use case that we're working on. So for example, if we're working on a use case that requires the subject matter expertise of a fraud analyst, then we have to spend significant amounts of time with them validating and verifying the outputs from the models across a wide range of different metrics, everything from truthfulness through to accuracy and more sort of like less obvious things around kind of your tone of voice, which can vary significantly for different use cases. So that's one kind of a key theme that's come up for us, is like the challenges to some extent, because of the nature of these models. They are broad, generalist, instruction-tuned models that have been tuned to be able to respond to a wide variety of instructions, and so they're generalist models. But then, so what that's meant is it's made it very easy for us to prototype, and we can very, very quickly stand up proof of concepts. But the evaluation and the monitoring that's required to get something into production is significant, and particularly again in a heavily regulated industry. And so that's really so I think that one of the key takeaways for us has been that it's very easy to run proof of concepts. It's very hard to put something into production. And I think that's a common theme that you see here across the industry right now. So to make sure that we stay ahead of all the latest developments, we work really closely with startups like Charis, and we also work with academic partners. We have a really strong partnership with the University of Edinburgh. We actually have 2 AI-focused PhD projects and 1 AI-focused postdoc project that we're going to be kicking off with the University of Edinburgh this year, and I think those are currently being advertised for right now. We're also partners in the recently announced CDT, the Centre for Doctoral Training and Responsible NLP, which is hosted at Edinburgh. And so we're very, very actively engaging with the academic community, and there's lots of opportunities that are coming out of that, and that really helps us stay ahead of all the kind of latest trends that are happening in the field. I'm going to have a little bit of a plug here and say that our team is growing very fast. We're rapidly recruiting ML researchers, ML engineers, DevOps engineers, software engineers. So if you are interested in any of those roles, or if you're interested in any of the PhD positions that I just mentioned, then please do just reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Euan. That was really interesting and insightful. If I can just ask you a quick question. I mean, I thought it was very interesting how you described the journey of the work that was done on creating the right data infrastructure, and then governance, and then experimenting and kind of prototyping different solutions. What sort of there may be organizations, especially smaller ones, that maybe find the prospect of doing the whole kind of digital transformation, data infrastructure creation, putting the governance in place daunting. And also they may find that, it might create a need for investment that is quite long-term and might be necessary before one can reap the benefits. Do you think there is a way to get started and kind of being able to evidence the benefits in order to proceed and convince investors or convince shareholders and so on?
Yeah, so again, this is kind of talking with our very kind of specific world that we live in, of like a heavy regulated financial services industry. But I think for us, what's been key is, in a lot of ways, generative AI has made that ability to show value quickly, or show the potential for value quickly, really easy, right? Because if you go back before the kind of before you had access to API based models, you would have really kind of it'd be very challenging to stand up any sort of pilot for example, any NLP based use case, right? So it might be a simple case of classifying customer complaints, right? Well, you've got to stand up a pretty significant amount of infrastructure, in the old world to have done that, right? Whereas now you can very, very quickly kind of take historical data, you can feed it into your API based model, and then get, and now it's not going to be perfect. And I often push back against the idea of using the example I just used there of using a large language model that's been instruction tuned for like broad generative use cases, using it for as a classifier is not exactly like best practice, right? But it does give you results quickly, and it does mean that you can very quickly have a route to value and say, okay, like, well, if we run a little pilot on this, or if we take historical data and we run it through this model, what would be the outcome of that, and how can we then use that as evidence that we can take forward? And so a lot of the work that we've done, we run like what we call alpha labs, which are effectively exactly what you're talking about, and that's kind of ultimately what we do. Now, would we ultimately take that sort of generative AI large language model and push it into production as like a classifier, for example? Absolutely not. But it makes it really easy to do those kind of really quick and dirty tests. So I think now's a great time to be doing those quick and dirty sort of experiments that allow you to get the evidence, to get that investment and get the stakeholder buy-in. I would caution though that everybody has used ChatGPT now. Everybody thinks it's a magical kind of new like sort of technology, particularly senior executives within your organization. And they think that it's going to be as simple as just like, just using ChatGPT, because they'll have already done some of that work. They'll, those executives in our organization are very smart people. They got to be like on the executive committee of large organizations because they're smart people. And so they spend some time playing with ChatGPT. They spend some time saying, oh, well, how about I just pretend that I'm a customer and classify some complaints. And then they think it's just going to be as simple as that. And so we spend a lot of time sort of taking them down from there and say, okay, yeah, we're excited too. It's going to be great, but here's what we need to do to actually get this into production as well. And so I think it's about keeping the excitement, but also pulling things down a little bit to say, okay, there's going to be a huge amount of work to get this actually into production though. And I think we can't shy away from the fact there's going to be a huge amount of work.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting evolution there for the machine learning expert, data scientist, AI developer profession, which is that we're seeing the entry threshold kind of drop as more and more things become available more easily, but then you have sort of a different responsibility within the organization to contribute your expertise to advise stakeholders and managers on what needs to be done. A very quick follow-up from the audience, which is about whether you would be, which is directly to you, and whether you'd be open to discuss and share your story and use cases with other organizations. I suspect the answer to that is it depends, but I'll let you take it.
Generally more than happy to. It's just depends on the level of details, but we're broadly actually quite open. It's there's I don't think there's nothing super secret that we do really other than our data, which is obviously we're not gonna share, but there are a lot of the techniques and things we do are there's nothing I think massively sort of IP dependent. So more than happy to have those discussions.
And another one, which I suppose is also more specifically directed to you. And by the way, Edoardo and Charis, if you want to switch on your camera so we can we'll start moving into kind of general discussion. But the question is about whether information security controls in financial services are a barrier to adopting AI solutions. So, for example, using API-based models.
So it has been a challenge for us, without a doubt. So we've got information security concerns, which is obviously it's a huge thing for us. We also have data residency requirements, which are challenging, and I'll touch on that in a minute. So for us, we've got a very strong partnership with AWS, and so accessing like large language models via API, via the AWS Bedrock service is kind of a key thing for us, because that kind of is already effectively lives within our estate, and so that's relatively straightforward. We also though have hedged our bets, and we've kind of stood up access to Azure's OpenAI service and also GCP's Gemini service. And we have various mechanisms that we can pipe through to those and connect through secure private link. The data residency thing has actually probably been a bigger challenge than the secure private link piece, which is actually been primarily driven by like the massive GPU shortage. So, if you look at where the GPU clusters are being built, they're not being built in the UK right now, although a lot of the infrastructure is being built out. And so for us, like for example, a lot of the infrastructure is based in Frankfurt right now, which is challenging for us, or obviously US East Coast is obviously the biggest centers, but those are not places that we can send our data. And so we spend a lot of time convincing cloud providers to make sure they stand up the models in the various different regions that we can actually access. So yeah, so it's been challenging, but I think we've managed to navigate that. And I think our early adoption and early investments have meant that we're significantly ahead of our competitors because of that.
Yeah, and I think this highlights, so Edoardo was talking a lot about how we've got new, more open source models. We also, some of these models are getting smaller, but there is the important issue of compute. And where that's deployed, how it's done in an energy efficient and a cost effective way, and in your case also where it's done. I want to come back, please, to everybody in the audience. Please do continue to ask your questions in the chat or raise your hand if you would like to speak. But I want to go back to Edoardo, and you can answer this in a very kind of personal and biased way. But when you're looking at what has come out of research on generative AI in recent years, is there anything in particular that you find exciting or that you find challenging, and that you think the next sort of big step change will come from? So this could be because of a challenge like evaluation that we have right now, or it could be because of new techniques that are emerging and some new capability that we might see. So do you have any thoughts of what we can expect down the line?
Well, yeah, I think like the answer to this question actually also connect to the previous one, which is, what kind of advances can we make in terms of efficiency? And there are many aspects of efficiency that are relevant. So one is, how do you fine tune open source models with respect to a small amount of parameters by using a limited amount of memory or time? There is efficiency in inference, which means, when you deploy the models, how can you make sure that you don't, spend too much on generating data? And on both fronts, there's been a lot of interesting developments. With respect to the second one, there is now a sort of shift even in the underlying architecture of large language models and foundations models. It's not clear yet where we're going, but the trend is moving from the transformer architecture, which is the one that is common to most of the models we discussed, to state space models, which basically have the advantage that they have a constant memory, so they can handle very long sequences, and again, they have reduced costs for deployment. With respect to the first part, which is how do you customize and fine tune your model, which is also a solution to, securing data privacy and so on, because you can do it in-house and through federated learning, even by using data that is located in different parts of the world on different devices. And recent advancements on parameter efficient fine-tuning are very encouraging. There is a method called LoRa, especially used in combination with quantization, that is now very common in many companies as a way to fine-tune in-house LLMs. Especially with the goal of getting smaller models, but that are customized for the specific applications the company care about. So yeah, this I think are maybe the two trends I would mention. Sorry, I think you're muted, Michael.
Sorry. Yes. Yes. Some of these thoughts bring me to the a small plug also for the university in our department, which is that what we're seeing is also that there's much more focus on how to make the training and the models and the use of the hardware and deployment really work in practice. And we have got another doctoral training center in machine learning systems starting very soon, that will try to train the people who have that sort of hybrid expertise. So it's not just AI and Gen AI, it's also that you need to understand computer systems and storage and processing very well. Turning to Charis, one thing I found very interesting in your presentation was that you emphasized this idea of building trust. What do you, how much of a challenge is it at the moment when you talk to potential partner organizations or clients to actually convince them they can get to a point where they are reasonably the way in which they use the models is reasonably safe. Because I can imagine that when you have a complex workflow, if this agent is planning to do it and it gets it wrong, you might lose money, you might lose the customer, you might get people upset, all kinds of bad things can happen.
So the short answer is you cannot really convince them straight away. Like as they are LLMs right now, if you implement them without actually having the business owner next to it, and they will just output stuff that they don't really agree with. The same way that you get someone new in your company, and if they're not trained, they will not output, they will not perform the way you expect them to be. So the best way to convince them is actually, as I said, through the copilot. You say, look, you can deploy this model as an assistant to your customer service agents or to your employees. Through the interactions you're having with them, you can provide some feedback, and then you can see them slowly improving. So that's one way, which is about building trust through them seeing it firsthand. The other part is mainly about putting some safeguards and some guardrails around the models. So Euan talked about monitoring. So we have put some things in place, like we're using Langwatch and some other Athena, some other platforms that they observe the outputs of the LLM. And there are actually some APIs that they can detect sentiment. They can detect, for example, inappropriate language. They can detect if the retrieved results are not correct. Of course, this comes with the cost of latency. But yeah, same way that you have even in manual human processes. Like if you want to build trust, it takes a bit more time. And there are two ways as well. One is pre-generation and the other is post-generation. In the beginning, you can do it post-generation, so you can see if the results of the LM comply with what you want. But the pre-generation is when you actually want to fine-tune the LLM with data that you already have, and then you detect it at generation that the responses are not correct. So yeah, that's very briefly how we do it. Yeah, as I said, the short answer is you cannot really convince anyone from the get-go. And I'm sure that Euan has exactly the same story. You have, for example, the CEOs or the executive committee coming in saying, look, this work, and then you're trying to show them how how they actually perform, and then they get to understand that this is not really a trustworthy. And you want to sit down with the people who will use it, and then you want their feedback and their input to gradually inform, what are the potential and the right answers that they should generate. Yeah, that's briefly it.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking of cases like there was this recent scandal with Air Canada where it's a chatbot, invented a fake refund policy, and then the courts found that the company has to honor them if this is what the customer was told, right? So
yeah, exactly.
That would be very worrying for a company.
Of course, I mean there's both reputational and legal risks in this case, and that's why this, as I said, this is the biggest barrier to adoption of these systems when they come straight away to the end users, to visitors actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Funny enough, this case about Air Canada was pre-generative AI that was actually realized, which is, I don't know how actually got with their own response, but even deterministic non-generative AI systems, they can get it wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we're getting into some kind of other relevant challenges that are around bias and so on. So there's a question from the audience about how much consideration is given to AI solutions finding a way around using protected characteristics via correlated non-obvious proxies like occupation. So to those who haven't come across this terminology, what happens very often in AI models is that while you may not have protected characteristics in your data, like age, gender, disability, ethnicity, and so on, you might pick those up because they're correlated with things like where the customer lives, or how much income they have, or other data that you might have. And this is a common problem in machine learning models, especially if they are black boxes, like many of the Gen AI models are. So would any of you like to pick this one up and maybe suggest some ways that can be addressed, or positive examples, negative examples where it's been done?
Or maybe I can say a few words and then other people can chime in if they feel I missed something. But so obviously, I guess in the development of foundation models and LLMs, companies spend a lot of time and effort in making sure they are not biased. In the process of training an LLM, one of the important steps is called reinforcement learning from human feedback. So try to align LLMs and foundational models to human preferences. Obviously, this is a way to mitigate this issue, not eradicate it from the model behavior. So it's an active field of research where we're trying to understand how to make models not biased and, again, faithful, which is another important aspect. So this is from the side of modeling. Obviously, from the side of evaluation, there are nowadays a lot of benchmarks and evaluation suites that are specifically designed to measure to what extent a model is biased with respect to gender, for instance, or race, but it could be like many other protected characteristics. And again, it's still work in progress to understand to what extent we can actually not just even prevent models from generating, toxic or hallucinated text, but also how to measure correctly when that happens and to what extent that happens.
And I guess with generative AI, the one particular challenge might be that the range of things the model can be asked is so broad that it's unlike a classifier. If for example in financial services people have been discussing credit scoring, that's it's one number that comes out. It's maybe easier to evaluate, but of course a generative AI model might do all kinds of things and create all kinds of outputs. Any other thoughts on these bias and fairness issues, Euan?
Yeah, I mean, this is like something that I touched upon when I was speaking earlier, is that this is something that we obviously take extremely seriously, and we spend a significant amount of time trying to mitigate against any issues around bias and fairness within the models. I think to Edoardo's point, there's no kind of silver bullet here, and I think the generative AI sort of wave of models does pose challenges, like you're saying, Michael, because it's different. It's not like just a simple classifier that you have control over. You, to some extent, are offloading a lot of that risk to the model providers as well, right? Because if you're not training your own foundation model, you're not aligning it through human feedback yourself, and which effectively, unless you're Google or Amazon or or Microsoft or whoever, you're not really doing that generally. Then you have to kind of offload a lot of risk to the model provider. Now, we obviously still need to evaluate the outputs of the models and make sure they adhere to our requirements for bias and fairness. And so it goes back to my point that a big focus for us has been evaluating the models. And one of the key metrics that we evaluate on is bias and fairness. And we've done that in a number of different ways. We've done it through things like counterfactual examples, right? So simply just swap out he for she, for example. Does it change the output of the model? And and it's and that does oftentimes significantly change the outputs of the models. And we've seen issues around where somebody's referred to as a manager, that will shift the kind of the perception of he versus she, and within it, for example. The challenge for us then becomes, how do you actually fix it once you've recognized it? Because you don't oftentimes have the ability to, you end up in a situation where you're prompt engineering the model to try and get it to respond in a certain way. And anybody that's spent any amount of time prompt engineering will know it is an incredibly frustrating and painful process to go through if you're trying to tweak a foundation model to get the output that you want. And so I think that kind of rolls back into some of the conversations we've been having as well around, increasingly I see open source models and the ability to fine tune those models is kind of the route forward for a lot of this, because you pull back that control away from the model providers to yourselves and your specific use case. And there are certain use cases where you do actually want some bias in there. You want it to differentiate between different characteristics, like protected characteristic groups, right? Because they require different responses, and so yeah. So there's a broader question around like alignment, but I think it's all about putting in place robust evaluation frameworks that are a combination of human evaluation and automated evaluation that really sort of cover as much ground as possible.
And while there are some companies that are emerging that will provide these sorts of fairness, bias testing, mitigation approaches as a service, I think there is still quite a lot of nervousness, especially from kind of the buyers of solutions who don't have the in-house expertise to navigate all these thorny issues, that they can't really get kind of many assurances in the supply chain they're using unless they put a lot of effort into it. So I do think that is still something that many organizations view as a bit of a barrier to adoption. So if there's any entrepreneurs in the audience, maybe that's something to consider, where new propositions could have a lot of value and could become very useful. I mean, I can just say for the university that we're looking at vendors that we're getting software from, and getting sort of any fairness guarantees is tricky in many cases. Any other questions from the audience? We've kind of just come just about to the end of our time, but if there's one more question, we might take that. I'm not seeing anything in the chat.
Maybe I should add something on the last point.
Yes, please do.
We talked a lot about evaluation and so forth. I think the problem with generative AI is also about objectivity. Like, it's very difficult to objectively say that this is, biased or not. Some people might find a response too conservative, and some other might find it too woke, for example. So this also depends on the organization. Sorry for the words I used before, but each organization might have different tolerance and different kind of preferences in the way that the AI will behave. And that's why it's important to have, as Edoardo said, like, RLHF, reinforcement from my feedback, to align with the preferences and the appetite, the style that the company wants. So I think this actually adds up more in the complexity of, are we building something that performs as we want? Because, if you give it to me versus a colleague, maybe we'll have conflicting views, whereby a binary classification is much easier to evaluate.
Yeah. And the final question just came in. If one of you wants to pick that up. So often people think about synthetic data as a possible solution. Is that something either of you has experimented with, and is it a way to counteract biases that might be hidden in historical data?
I will very quickly, something I would say: if you use synthetic data, when you generate synthetic data, you are generating the biases of the model that will generating the synthetic data in the first place. So you have to make sure that this base model is the one you actually want. For us, it works very well when going to old school traditional ML, when you want to generate a lot of examples for classification. And we have not fine-tuned our own models to see how well it will behave. But it's very, it does pretty well when actually have toxicity classification. In that case, it does pretty well. But not when it comes to generation.
Great, thank you. So I propose we wrap up there, as we've run out of time. Thank you all. First of all, to our speakers for joining today. I thought it was very stimulating discussion, and it was great to hear insights from kind of different things you have all worked on. Thank you also to our audience who have stuck with us throughout this hour, and for those who are in Edinburgh, have preferred to join this call than to go out into the bright sunshine that we unusually have today. And so the recording is going to be available on the Bay Center's YouTube channel if you want to have a look at that or share it with colleagues and friends. And we are looking forward to welcoming you at one of the future Bayes Forum events. So watch this space, and hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.